Pat, it's become one of my go-to lines to deflect the culture problem uh, questions that I field in comments about Ohio State having a culture problem. And I've said, no excuses. They didn't make the plays, didn't get it done. However, they were at the 35-yard line to end the season on the road at Michigan, and they were that close, whether you look at a mistake or two, like you just mentioned, or one pass completion away from being the number one seed, undefeated team in the playoff. And if they've got culture problems, then they must be the most talented team in college football history to work through culture problems and just kind of throw out a 50% effort and still be that close to being the number one seed in the playoffs. So,
yeah. Well, and look, you're Ohio State. This is, the New York Yankees, the Dallas Cowboys. Pick your team that not only has historically been great, but has been great somewhat recently, and continues to be close, right? So you're going to get the standard is what it is. And I think the Buckeyes would all tell you that. The people inside the building at the Woody Hayes, they understand that fact. So when you're close, you didn't reach it, right? And that's just frankly what it is. Now, if we're talking culture, when you don't reach your goals, people are going to look for answers, right? And those, Ryan Day himself has looked for answers. Why couldn't we finish that game? And it's not just on that. He didn't want to put it on one play. He talked about, could we have gotten stops earlier in the game, or could we have been more efficient earlier in the game to score so we didn't have to be in those positions? Fans are going to look for answers too, and they're not in the building. They're not rewatching every play, every snap. Most of them, maybe some of them are. I know some Buckeye fans who do go back and watch a lot. So I'm not saying everybody, but culture's an easy thing to throw out, especially when you were watching Michigan and the last few years, and they've talked about physicality and things in the trenches, and I get all of that. And if you're Ohio State, you have to prove it. Now, this Buckeye team did go to Notre Dame last year in what was one of the more physical games I've seen, standing on the sidelines in that fourth quarter, and found a way to win that one late, right? You don't win that game if you have a culture problem. Losing to Michigan, it's not necessarily a culture problem. You just lost to what ended up being the best team in the country on the road. And frankly, from an outside perspective, if you're looking at that rivalry and you want that rivalry to be at its best, the home team is going to just sometimes win because they're the home team. And I'm not saying that's what happened with Michigan, but Ohio State was still one of the better teams in the country last season. And I think, too, the Cotton Bowl kind of affects the perception, right? Obviously, losing to Michigan, not making the Big Ten championship game, not making the college football playoff was always going to put a damper on what you were going to do heading into the offseason. But if you go out in the Cotton Bowl and look like the Buckeyes did most of the season, okay, fine. You have a better feeling going into the offseason. But Kyle McCord transfers, and Ohio State decides to try to tinker with the offensive line. Then Devin Brown gets hurt early in the first quarter, comes out of the game in the second quarter, and now you're playing with the freshman quarterback who's clearly not prepared. And so the game is ugly. It's boring. And then the defense, despite holding Missouri off the board for 3 quarters, just finally the dam breaks and they can't do it anymore. And so you go into the offseason feeling like, 2 losses in a row again for the second straight year. And I can see why people point to the culture. But having been around this program throughout the offseason, we're over there all throughout spring. We're there during the summer when they're having recruiting camps and coaches are around. You're talking to players. I don't see a culture problem. If there's a culture problem, I don't think 12 juniors elect to come back, frankly. If they wanted to finish their careers somewhere, they could have gone elsewhere in the transfer portal. Can it be better? Absolutely. Unless you win the national championship and go undefeated, there are always things that can improve. I'm not saying that, but I do think that the culture is right. It's just about getting over that hump, and it's not easy. It's just simply not. That's why one team each conference lifts a trophy at the end of the year, and then one team lifts the national championship. It's tough to get to that point, and that's not an excuse for Ohio State. The Buckeyes need to get it done.